I don't want people to ever feel like if they can't afford something that they still can't take that aesthetic and influence and create that high-low look or just a low look. And that's fine too, right? I mean, that's another sort of takeaway is when I think of like stylish people, it's not always just somebody who can buy the biggest brands. It's how you wear it, right? It's, are you wearing the clothes or the clothes wearing you?
Want to listen to this Ivory Tower Boiler Room or True Crime and Academia episode ad-free? Head on over to our Patreon, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room, to listen to all of our podcast episodes without any ads. You get access to our video episodes, our bonus episodes, and even more exclusive content, including merchandise. It only starts at $5 a month, so head on over to our Patreon. Again, it's patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. And while you're at it, you know what would be such a help is if you could rate and review the Ivory Tower Boiler Room on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And make sure that you follow us and share out our podcast to all of your friends. It truly does help. And I want to thank you all. It means so much that you're listening to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I hope that you enjoy this episode. Just a brief message before what I know you all are going to absolutely love as an episode today. I have such a great guest. There are 2 book clubs going on during this spooky season. Happy spooky season, everyone. I am hosting the Ivory Tower Boiler Room Book Club. We are reading Parachute Women by Elizabeth Winder. It is all about the women behind the Rolling Stones and even the invention of rock and roll's success. And then Mary DePippi, the host of True Crime and Academia, is reading Haunted: Asylums, Prisons, and Sanatoriums by Jamie Davis. So to join both book clubs, you just have to go to patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. It's patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Each book club has its own membership level, so each is $4. If you want to join both book clubs, then join the ITBR professor level instead of like joining each book club separately, because for $10 a month, not only do you get both book clubs, you also get all of our bonus audio and video episodes and also our entire video and audio episode catalog, including this episode ad-free. So can't wait to see you all. The deadline to join both book clubs is October 20th. That's because Mary and myself, we have to just make sure that we coordinate the private Zoom session that we'll have with all our book club members. So I can't wait to see who's in the book club and get your hands on Parachute Women and Haunted for our book clubs. And then also, I'm now offering consulting. So everyone out there, if you know someone who has college admission essay questions, they're not sure where to start with the undergraduate college process, they have financial questions about college. I was lucky enough and had a lot of financial conversations about loans, and I actually didn't have any loans from my college experience, and I was able to get scholarships. So I can help you with that. I can help with graduate school questions, graduate school thesis editing, dissertation editing, podcast questions, help with your podcast, starting a podcast, social media branding questions. I'm here for your services. So my initial consultation fee is only $30 and it's a 1-hour Zoom. So head to patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room and you'll see that consultation option. Okay, without further ado, here is today's episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I get to finally talk about fashion, and it's a love of mine. So I am so excited to be joined here with an amazing guest. I've been watching so many of her YouTube clips. Sowmya Krishnamurthy, whose new book is called Fashion Killa: How Hip Hop Revolutionized High Fashion. So Sowmya's work has been in XXL, Rolling Stone, Vibe, Essence, Complex, Billboard, Billboard, Playboy, The Village Voice, and Time. She is an on-air expert. She's appeared on NPR, CNN, MSNBC, BBC, MTV, SiriusXM, and Fashion Killa comes from Sowmya's expertise in music, fashion, pop culture. She was born in India, raised in Michigan, graduated from U of Michigan, Stephen M. Ross School of Business, and this is your first book. So congratulations, and I'm so excited to just dive right in with you, Sowmya.
Thank you. Let's go. And you look very fashionable today. For people who can't see, he's got like a little tropical shirt on. Like I went more cardigan, fall, back to school. It's a little bit chillier where I am, but Dr. Andrew, he looks like he's about to go on vacation.
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm still in my summer Fire Island vibes. So I don't want it to go. I'm on Long Island. We have some nice weather right now, so I'm just enjoying. So I just have to ask you first, Sowmya. You wear so many hats from being a freelance pop culture expert. I've seen your videos on Sway Show. You also are a freelance writer. How do you find it navigating all of these different faces that you wear?
You know, it's something that I've always loved, just kind of this idea of being a multi-hyphenate. I mean, that's sort of the fancy word, but in reality, I'm just someone who gets kind of bored really easily. So this idea of being able to do a lot of different things, obviously with the centerpiece being in music, in hip hop and pop culture, I think it makes it fun. I think it makes it really interesting. And where we are in the media now, you really have to be somebody who wears a lot of hats, right? You can't just be the person with the byline. You need a podcast. You need to do on-air things. Need to bake a pie in an hour. Like you got to do all of these different things, and that's just really the name of the game. But I think if you have that passion and you are somebody who just likes to learn and a steep learning curve kind of interests you instead of scares you, I think it keeps it interesting. I think I've been in this industry over 15 years, like, which I think makes me officially an OG, or at least like a medium G on way to OG. And the reason is it's still fun. Like every day there's kind of something new. I can use different skill sets, whether it be in writing or my business school background and things like advertising and social media and marketing, all of those things. And it just kind of keeps things constantly fresh and interesting. And I like the idea of having a bunch of balls in the air at the same time.
Well, I was feeling so nostalgic watching you analyze Lemonade by Beyonce, or just these like pop culture moments that I remembered, like when Formation came out, and I even like used it in my college classroom to analyze what she was doing with that art form and protesting. So, do you look back at those moments and are you surprised about some specific pop culture just highlights and think, oh, wait, yeah, I was part of that conversation?
It's amazing. So, I mean, growing up, I was a kid who loved hip hop, and I would watch so many hours of like MTV and TRL and reading things like Vibe magazine and just having almost this adoration of people who got to live through like Biggie and Tupac, seeing Jay-Z's first concert. But when you're in the industry, you get to have your moments. I mean, some of my earliest interviews, now looking back, were Drake, Baby J. Cole, Kendrick Lamar, Travis Scott. Like I saw Travis Scott opening up for Iggy Azalea. So I just want you to like let that sit in for a minute. Like where were we compared to, the rooms he's doing now? And I think it's really cool is to be able to be a part of these moments, and hopefully for the fans and people at home, helping sort of distill it, analyze it in a way that's meaningful. And really with this book Fashion Killa, it was this idea of hip hop stories being told in these really important and essential ways. Oftentimes, as a culture, as an art form, when it comes to the literary world or sort of the larger culture, it still is getting its respect, right? We start to see these moments as hip hop turns 50 this year, but 50 is still kind of a baby compared to rock and roll and pop and country. So to be able to be at this place in my career where I came in as a fan. I have all these experiences working with now household name artists, but to be able to now tell these stories in a way that really live forever, right? Once in a it's in a book, it's forever. It's really a blessing, and I'm really appreciative.
Well, did you have a chance to see the Fashion Institute of Technology's amazing hip hop exhibit? It was
Absolutely.
incredible. Oh my gosh, I saw it in April. It was stunning what they did, I thought.
Yeah, it was great. And I think again, just to see the clothing up front and sort of what they look like on the mannequin, I think is amazing. And with Hip Hop 50, there have been a lot of these different sort of pop-ups and exhibits. And in many ways, it's been like this journey, kind of this nostalgic journey, but also a great history lesson. I mean, I wasn't around when those things were actually being worn on people. So it's this idea of sort of history and the fact that it's like history in the making, right? So who knows, like maybe what Cardi B is wearing now at the Met Gala one day will be in a museum exhibit. And that's pretty exciting to feel like you're a part of this like living, breathing history.
And just that term hip hop, I think what you do so brilliantly in your book, Fashion Killa, is just breaking down literally the intersection of what hip hop even means. Like, I'm even thinking of that FIT exhibit. There were pieces with Nicki Minaj, and I always think of Nicki as a rapper. But like even Beyonce has been a hip hop artist. She did that collaboration with the Chicks and they thought she was country. So I feel the hip hop industry is always in flux. Like it's this very fluid genre, like more so than say country is. Like there's a back and forth. How do you come to understand even just where this term hip hop derives?
Yeah, I think in the book, especially in the beginning, I do make it a point to sort of break down going back to the history. And we start in 1973, which a lot of people sort of agree is like the origins of hip hop. But of course, I always put in that footnote for like the true heads out there like, no, culture doesn't start on one day, one summer day in New York. Of course, it's kind of a continuum. But we all kind of agree on August 11th, 1973, and the elements of the culture included the b-boy, the DJ, emceeing, graffiti. Those were sort of like the cores that then expanded, and based upon who you ask, I think of a great KRS-One quote. It's like knowledge and fashion and all these things become part of this all-encompassing culture. Where we are now in the music business, it's tricky because the idea of genres is so blurred, right? It's before a lot of it was kind of these arbitrary labels given to genres based upon things like radio. So if an artist happened to be a Black artist, okay, you go to quote urban radio, whatever that means. If you're a white artist, now, okay, we're going to push you to pop or rock, regardless of what maybe your influences are or how you want to define yourself. Now, in this era of streaming, where people pretty much are taking genres and creating these multi-genre playlists, just this idea of these old school kind of nomenclature starts to feel really old school. So it's hard. It's a balance because on one hand, you definitely don't want hip hop to get so diluted that just everything is hip hop. But I also feel that with genres in general now, like if I put a cowboy hat on, am I country? You know what I'm saying? Like what are really those important pillars that we want to keep moving forward, but what are some of those old school barriers that really are kind of outdated? So as an industry, a lot of people are figuring that out right now.
Well, and as a queer scholar, I feel that hip hop, again, it's kind of the word queer, where it's an umbrella term, but you also don't want to, like you borrowing your word, Sowmya, you don't want to dilute it. Like you don't want to take away the essence of, say, for queerness, sexuality. Like
Yeah.
hip hop still has its roots. And I mean, to bring up queerness and hip hop, you look into racism, classism, homophobia. And I feel when I think of hip hop and sexuality, I think now of the iconic Little Nas X and like where hip hop has now gone in terms of even the clothing and the fashion and the way Little Nas X, his body is displayed in provocative ways, but he's proving this artistic point. So, what was it like when you were looking at, say, the ills of hip hop battling societal ills?
Yeah, I think we have to remember hip hop started very much as young Black men speaking to other young Black men about their experiences. And that's still very much, it's rooted in the Black American experience, and that can't be forgotten, and it must always sort of be understood. I think over time, different artists just started to feel like either they weren't being spoken to. A huge sort of through line that's constantly plagued hip hop has been things like misogyny, um, hypersexuality, hyperaggression. Even for women, it's sometimes this idea of, can you be a feminist and love hip hop? And those are conversations that are often had. I think that can be very much extended to the queer audience. Like, can you love hip hop when, especially in the earlier days, there would be, homophobic slurs being used? They weren't oftentimes used, I think, with that intent, but that was just, as a culture, what was colloquial, right? Like a way to counter hyper masculinity was this notion, well, that has to be somebody who perhaps doesn't exude quote unquote masculine traits. Now looking back, again, it's all very antiquated, and even these idea of gender definitions, it's all very gray, it's very fluid. One can't be put into a box. And I think when we look at fashion, it was really important for me to highlight, not just sort of the men in hip hop who have taken on much more, I would say, gender fluid fashions. So somebody like a Young Thug wearing that, beautiful Italian gown on the cover of his Jeffrey mixtape, Kid Cudi showing up in a wedding dress to the CFDA, Little Nas X, really, like you said so eloquently, utilizing not just the clothing, but even just the skin and his body, and very much wearing that in a way to make a statement. And I think it's great. I think at the end of the day, hip hop, like so many other youth cultures, it's really about going against the establishment.
Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I'm so excited to shout out the Gay and Lesbian Review, who is helping to sponsor the ITBR podcast. For all of you out there, the Gay and Lesbian Review is a bi-monthly magazine where you can discover new things about gay and lesbian literature, history, and culture. And the GL Review publishes essays in a wide range of disciplines, as well as a slew of reviews of books, plays, and movies, and a number of special features, such as artist profiles and their popular art memo column. Each issue of the magazine brings you consistently intelligent, lively, thought-provoking articles focused on a unifying theme. For example, their September-October issue centers on the theme Cracking the Closet. So, starting in the 19th century, a number of artists and writers found ways to crack the closet by expressing their sexuality between the lines or in the interstices of their work. For example, Ignacio Darnad, who is a friend of the ITBR podcast, he's been on our show, writes all about illustrator J.C. Leyendecker, whose work for Ivory Soap and Arrow Collars gave him plenty of opportunities to draw pictures of well-dressed and at times scantily dressed American men. And you also can find an article by Vernon Rosario, who has been on the podcast, and he talks about the quest for sex in the Middle Ages. So, to subscribe, visit glreview.org. That's glreview.org. Click subscribe. So on their website, go all the way over to the right-hand side and you'll see the button subscribe. Click subscribe and enter the promo code ITBR50 because you're getting 50% off your subscription to the print or digital edition of the Gay and Lesbian Review magazine. I can't wait for you all to have your copy of the Gay and Lesbian Review magazine, and make sure that you take a picture when your magazine arrives or when you're reading it online and tag the GL Review on Instagram and ITBR, and we'll share it out in our stories. Enjoy your reading, everyone.
So it's this idea that what was considered rebellious in 73 cannot be considered rebellious 50 years later. And I make the point in the book with the fans now, especially Gen Z, they don't aspire to have these old school rigid values. So of course those artists shouldn't either. And if it makes people uncomfortable in the industry or their parents, good. That's the point. Like, this is how you sort of push those buttons and make that parents just don't understand music. So when people sort of wag their finger like, no, this is not true hip hop, or it's somehow taking away from the forefathers, I don't believe that, because if anything, I would prefer people living their truth, whatever that is, in a way that's healthy and safe than kind of keeping things in the dark, where that doesn't help anybody, the music or the culture.
Well, and even thinking about Dennis Rodman, I mean, Dennis Rodman being in drag, and I don't want to say there was never backlash because I'm sure there is backlash to these like drag type accessories or how Dennis Rodman presents himself, but it kind of is interesting how it's acceptable as a professional basketball player. Like, oh, that's just Dennis. Or, understanding that there's this freedom in fashion. And I am wondering, like, I am a white man and, Sowmya, you were born in India. Like, what is it like for you in terms of looking at the Black empowerment aspect of hip hop? Like you brought up, hip hop really is deriving and coming from Black men, and like it comes out of the community. So like how does that feel in terms of even being an ally or observing what's going on with the industry and fashion?
Yeah, I think it's important anytime that you're within a culture is just to know the origins, to respect that, and also the people behind it. So their stories, their struggles, and like you said, to be an ally, I think is important. Even within the hip hop industry, there are people who kind of come in, they want that one rapper for a song, and then you never hear from them. Or if there's issues that are relevant to the community, they say nothing because it's like, well, it's not my problem. And I think that's, to me, very kind of inauthentic. But to make sort of an investment and a contribution in the long term, you really has to have that reverence and respect. I think what's always been great about hip hop and why it's now global is there has been this feeling of acceptance where even, we go back and look at someone like an Eminem, which now, I mean, him being the highest selling rapper makes a lot of sense, but it could have been very easy to like dismiss him. Like, well, he's a white boy from 8 Mile, like he has no authority to be an artist. But there was a difference between, let's say, Eminem versus Vanilla Ice, right? And obviously Vanilla Ice had some big records too, but that felt more so like parody, or almost using the culture and almost as kind of like culture vulture way, right? So I think that's really important in any sphere, even something like fashion, where it's important for people to, know the history, know the people, and also when you do have a platform to advocate. I think that's really important. Some people might disagree. They kind of view it as like a business. You do your job, you go home. But I personally feel, as somebody who, I'm one of the few women in my position, probably one of, if not the only person who's kind of, first generation from another country, and also grew up in a small town. Like I didn't grow up in New York or LA or Atlanta, like one of these big hubs. So being able to have that very cosmopolitan perspective, I think is helpful, because you're able to be very sort of empathetic and sensitive to all kinds of people. And I do think even with this book, I was really, really intentional that we have to be inclusive, because the few times hip hop and fashion are talked about, it's always through the lens of New York. It usually ends by like 2000, because after that they get tired and are like, nah, skinny jeans, that doesn't count, and this is boring, and streetwear. Women are usually very much left out, and there might be a few kind of bold-faced names like a Little Kim, but I want to make sure, no, let's make sure we shout out like a Missy Elliott, who was able to really be a leader in body positivity before we had that term, right? And this idea that you can be the star of the video. We're not replacing her with the skinny girl or the model. Like, no, that's who she is. Similarly, looking at a global perspective, like we have to talk about what was going on in like London street style, of course, Japanese street style. How do we get to Bape and BBC and all of those things without looking into like Nigo and his story? So I think that was really important, that if we're going to do a comprehensive 50-year retrospective, let's make sure that those blind spots that oftentimes do plague hip hop, being very New York centric through like a male lens, sometimes an older lens, like being super cognizant of trying to underscore a lot of those unsung contributions as well.
And what you really bring to bear is just how many layers of identity there is with hip hop. And like that you are really opening the door for, say, not just, a Missy Elliott. Like there are many women who are part of the hip hop movement. And, there are those who are queer, or there are those who don't fit like this image of, say, a straight male hip hop performer. So I think that's a credit to you just drawing so much from the archive and your own experience with interviews. So I was curious, for your interview process of Fashion Killa, did you have very different conversations when you were talking to those from the hip hop industry compared to those from the fashion industry? Just because of gatekeeping. Like, I guess when I think of fashion industry, I do still think of that like Condé Nast model, or like there's a certain wall and there's a language you need to learn, where the hip hop industry seems more accessible because of its roots. And maybe that's a misreading on my part.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that your point about fashion is very true. It is this idea of, whether it be from the fashion industry, even fashion media, I think in many ways there have still been gatekeeping, barriers to entry. And we have to think about even luxury fashion. The very notion means it's something I can have and you can't have, right? It's a luxury. It's not a right that everyone gets to have. And inherently, there has to be some idea of the haves versus the have nots. I think in the interviews, it was interesting, just people's sort of perspectives and where they were rooted in. So obviously someone who grew up in hip hop and faced a lot of these challenges, whether it was not being able to pull clothes for a certain artist, or reaching out to the publicists at these big fashion houses and being totally ignored, versus somebody in fashion who, for many of them, their idea of hip hop was, much more recent. So they're thinking late 90s, early 2000s, right? I think now things have changed a little bit with someone like Dapper Dan's resurgence, but remember, it was the fashion industry who tried to like get him out of business, and it was Twitter who brought him back, right, decades later. So now the industry has to learn some of those archives and that history. But for a long time, I think you talk to a fashion person and they would say hip hop fashion really, certain names like Sean Puffy Combs, maybe Little Kim to a certain extent, maybe Kimora Lee Simmons, maybe. But at that time, a lot of those lines, Baby Fat, Rockaware, things like that, were called like, quote, urban fashion. So a person in the industry might have thought, well, I didn't cover that. Like, I only cover high fashion. And really, one of the through lines of the book is like this definition of luxury fashion is constantly changing, because now you ask a kid, they're talking about like Supreme. That might be their version of a luxury fashion line, versus their parents' version of a luxury fashion line. And it's becoming much more global. We're underscoring like niche designers, the new exciting designer. Like those are the things that are really making those waves. So I think when it came to the interviews, it was just making sure that being able to bridge those conversations. And very few people had worked in both industries. I think maybe only a handful. So for the most part, you could sort of see where people's like perspective was steeped from.
Mm. Was there a specific interview? Like, I know you interviewed Tommy Hilfiger, right? And how was it talking to someone who actually created a brand? Or it wasn't just Tommy Hilfiger, but you've interviewed a few who like they actually are the creator, like this is their vision. Is that an intimidating process?
No, not really. I interviewed a lot of people. So I think yeah, as time goes on, I could interview Joe Biden right now and it wouldn't be intimidating. I think what's interesting with the designers, so Tommy Hilfiger, Carl Kanai, April Walker, Dame Dash for Rockaware. There were a few names that were people, and then also some people behind the scenes. So like Dao Yi, he was at Sean John and then started public school, very successful line. So Loic, who works with Pharrell, and they launched BBC together. So some of them, again, are kind of these eponymous names you might know, and then others are behind the scenes people who are like doing the work as well. I think it's just an interesting perspective. You really get this balance between art and creativity and commerce, because at the end of the day you got to sell some clothes, right? So that was always interesting talking to those people, just getting that perspective of the industry. Tommy, what was really interesting, I spoke to him and Andy Hilfiger, his brother. What I wanted to show was just the journey of that line. And for Tommy, his background is just a kid who loved music. And there's this great quote I included, something like, I couldn't play an instrument, so I might as well have like dressed like the artist. And again, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something to that effect. And both of them really underscored how hip hop was so seminal in becoming a household name. When Snoop wore that famous rugby on the stage at SNL, like that was the watershed moment for that line. And of course, there were others. We have the great anecdote with Aaliyah, and also there's an awesome photo of her in the book too. You'll see in the final copy that shows how this line really was revolutionary in streetwear and pulling like kind of these more tomboy looks for women and things like that. And another thing I was really important was talking about that infamous rumor, right, that almost canceled Tommy Hilfiger. I remember so distinctly. I was in like middle school, and my friend, who's a big Tommy Hilfiger head, like pulls me aside and says in a whisper, "Oh my God, Tommy Hilfiger's racist. I can't wear these clothes anymore." No one knew where the rumor started, but it circulated like he had somehow gone on Oprah. He had made these very disparaging comments. Oprah kicked him off the show. And the word on the street was like, we don't fuck with him anymore. And what's so interesting is that never happened. Like years later, Oprah herself's like, he never did my show. And when I spoke to Tommy, he said, they actually did an investigation, and the rumor like traced back to some college campus. It was probably some kid goofing around on like the internet back then, like in a chat room or something. And that almost, undermined the brand. So the line I wanted to draw there is really this idea of, we're starting to see the rise of the internet in that era, fake news, and kind of this idea of cancel culture, but also on the flip side, for a designer, that responsibility. Like if it's your name on the tag, anything you say or have alleged to say or do, that could affect sort of the brand. And what does that mean? So that was really interesting, is even some of these kind of myths and rumors and urban legends that I had heard growing up, being able to dispel them.
Well, and I think I have to bring up Anna Wintour. I mean, when you think of, in my opinion, gatekeeping, I think of Vogue and I think of the response with the Met Gala. Like you brought up the Met Gala, Sowmya, but how about how exclusionary it had been? It really was. Like this is a private affair. It's very VIP centered. And in terms of like bodies that were present, like, and then there's starting to be, even with the Victoria's Secret fashion show, which really has struggled because I think it's about which bodies are we going to represent. And, there's a way that Anna Wintour, in my opinion, had to open up the Met Gala because the culture was just changing so much in terms of body positivity or in terms of social class. And like knowing that there are celebrities who they can aspire to be, but probably will never obtain that level of notoriety, but at least now they can be represented in terms of how they look and, different cultures and races. So, do you think, like, when it comes to, say, Vogue, the hip hop industry didn't really need Vogue, Vogue needed them to be relevant in our current cultural moment? I mean, that sounds very pessimistic. But
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, for example, someone like Puffy, like one of his first big high fashion spreads was in Vogue, and it was called like Puffy Takes Paris. He's starring in it with Kate Moss. It's shot by Annie Leibovitz. And he says, looking back on it, that it really was almost this kind of guess who's coming to dinner moment, right? His phrasing. And this idea of like a black man within a white space. And it was shot in Paris, shot beautifully. They're like over the bridge looking at each other. And it's a really gorgeous spread. And for him, that kind of showed that high fashion really believed in him. And at the time, I mean, Sean John was really very much in its beginnings and ended up going on to winning a CFDA award and getting that industry kind of cosign. Another person was Kanye. I mean, who can forget when Kim and Kanye got the Vogue cover? So many people within the industry, outside of the industry, fans were just confused. And I remember speaking to some former Vogue people off the record, and they said that it was tough. Like, we don't agree with it. But according to them, I mean, Kanye was very, very aggressive about pitching Kim, how she's like the new Marilyn Monroe, and they're this power couple and they represent new America. And I think looking back, I mean, Anna was really smart because someone like a Kim Kardashian now goes to Paris Couture Week, right? Like the Met Gala has really, in my mind, it's like, what is Cardi B wearing? Will Rihanna show up? And what Kardashians are there and what are they doing? It's kind of become those are the tent poles. So I think for someone like Anna, I understand in her mind coming from this very sort of narrow lens of what's considered aspiration, what's beautiful, what's in their version kind of like the highbrow and what we should be covering, but also realizing that as times change, you can either get in front of it or you're going to get left behind. And I think with Vogue, their content, the reason that pivot into video has been really successful, and even the type of notables they cover is much more diverse. I mean, you might see a TikToker getting a Vogue video. You might see a reality star. And now we don't even like think twice about it. But I'm sure in, the hallowed walls of Condé Nast, there were probably people either pushing back, and saying that if we do this, we're really going to undermine the brand. And I think it's that balance for anything in the luxury space, whether we're talking about a magazine, a fashion line, a car, any of those things. What is that balance between maintaining this notion of aspiration and gatekeeping, but also realizing at some point it can't be so rarefied with the velvet rope that you're the only person sitting in the VIP, right? And there's nobody else around. That's not gonna work. And one thing we have to always remember, whether it's fashion, whether it's hip hop, we're still talking about a business. And at the end of the day, it's dollars and cents. So if something is going to push magazines, it's going to push clicks, get people excited, sometimes that's what you got to do. And it's just what it is to kind of keep the lights on.
well, and in our current influencer social media blitz of a culture, even American culture has just shifted so much.
Yeah.
Like that when you look back and when I was like reading your book and looking at examples, thinking, wow, even when I was growing up in middle school in the 2000s into like the 20 graduating in 2011 from high school, it feels like a completely different time, even though like linear time it's not that long, but now with social media and the influencer culture, they're going to the Met Gala like you've said, they're part of the hip hop industry, like promoting all of these different brands and
Yeah.
streetwear.
My
Yeah.
mind, it's sort of like BK and AK before Kim Kardashian and after. And obviously she was very much kind of the product of the times and being very savvy in leveraging at that point Twitter and then Instagram, reality television. I mean, there were a lot of factors involved, but I think the Kardashians, I mean, they really represented so much of this confluence of fame and wealth and celebrity, but also like of the American family. And because there's so many members at any given moment, somebody could be dating the biggest rapper in the world or the biggest basketball player. Like their hands are literally in all facets of culture. And I think in many ways, Kim was somebody who was very much part of that. And I do mention in the book with somebody like Kanye, he saw her as his muse and he changed her whole style, like from those like skin tight Hervé Leger dresses to nope, now you're only going to be in like the neutral color palette and I'm going to decide your outfits head to toe because I want you sitting front row at Paris Fashion Week. You're no longer going to be shopping at Kitson, you know, in LA. It's like less mall and more couture. That's what I want you to be.
Are you afraid of the dark? Sorry, I had to, everyone. It's Dr. Andrew Rimby. Happy spooky season and gothic and horror, just all the vibes. I am so excited to talk about Broadview Press, who you might know helps sponsor our podcast. They're an independent publisher in the humanities since 1985. Did you know they have so many horror novels that you need to get your hands on? They have Frankenstein, of course, by Mary Shelley. They have Dracula by Bram Stoker, one of my favorites. They have The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, Edgar Allan Poe's Poetry and Tales. Oh, they just have so many gothic novels that you all need to soak your teeth into, bob your teeth into. Some kind of Halloween metaphor is appropriate there. They also have academic books like Dr. Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock's The Mad Scientist's Guide to Composition. So if you're a writing professor out there, you need to get your hands on that. And they also have a gift package called Mystery Horror Sensation, which if you don't know what to choose, just choose the Mystery Horror Sensation gift package. Just a reminder, you get 20% off on broadviewpress.com, link in our show notes. Just use the code Ivory Tower, all lowercase. Ivory Tower, 20% off all your books on broadviewpress.com, all of them. I can't wait for you all to hear our next Broadview Press guest. It's coming in November. And definitely when you buy one of their horror or gothic novels or books, just make sure you tag us on Instagram at Ivory Tower Boiler Room and tag them too at Broadview Press. I know they'll love to share it. Okay, everyone. Be careful if you're reading in the dark. I don't want you to get too scared. Turn a light on. Bye, everyone. LGBT stories are universal, but each one speaks to the individual heart and soul of the writer telling it. Do you have a story to tell? Or have you been moved by an LGBT book, film, painting, television show, or other form of media? Then the Gay and Lesbian Review wants to hear from you. The GNLR believes in bringing awareness to queer art and artists through reviews, commentary, and thought pieces in which the author relates their personal lives to a particular piece of art, a novel, a movie. In addition to the print magazine, the GNLR also publishes articles on its blog. So you can see all of this on glreview.org. That's glreview.org. Remember, you get 50% off your subscription of the GL Review magazine when you use the promo code ITBR50. That's 50% off your print or digital subscription when you use promo code ITBR50. To learn more about submitting an article for the GNLR, visit their writer's guidelines. The link is located at the bottom of their homepage. And if you have any questions, email Stephen Hemrick. That's STEPHEN.HEMRICK at glreview.org. The GNLR and its readers can't wait to see what you have to say.
And he did a great job. And I think she was also a great student and has taken that and now is, you know, on her own figuring out what her style is. But we really saw that evolution of Kim, and all of a sudden the brands and the people that the family's close with are now household names. I mean, everyone knows who Riccardo Tisci is. Everyone knows who Olivier Roosting is. I mean, these were insider names, but now we all know who they are because they've been on the show. So it's interesting. And I think when it comes to just this influencer culture, it's I'm as a millennial, I'm definitely a little bit of the old school mindset where I came up under you sort of put your head down, do the work, let the work speak for itself. And I still feel that should be the foundation versus sort of the clout and the smoke and mirrors if you're looking at kind of a long-term perspective. But yeah, if you're just trying to make a lot of money right now, like put the book down, go on TikTok, and make that money. But I do think it's also a little bit glib to assume everyone can do what the Kardashians have done, because right time, right place, right people involved, their own sort of work ethic and vision. And if it was that easy, everyone would do it, and they're not, right? So I think that's a bit of the fallacy too of just because you have a lot of followers, that's going to be forever, and it's not. Like, the one thing about these industries, we love like a flavor of the week, like who's the hot rookie that we're going to put on a pedestal. Then next week nobody knows you, and you get the, oh, I'm sorry, your name's not on the list. And that's real. So I think for people sort of outside the industry trying to get in, of course, get in wherever you fit in, but at some point, I'm a firm believer, if somebody asks you, so what do you do, I would hope that there's some sort of an answer that what you do can't be replicated either by another person, somebody younger, someone they can get for cheaper. Because if you do that, I think it's really a slippery slope. And then you're constantly chasing that next like, that next follow. And I don't know about you, but to me, I just don't see that as longevity.
Yeah, that's why I'm a gay literary scholar. Like, no one can take away my PhD in academic work, even though I'm now in the media space, like, and expanding. But I agree with you. You gave so much good advice about social media branding and the influencer culture. I always say, you can instantly do some really wild antics and
Yeah.
get those likes up. But then what's going to happen when you have all that attention too? Like, do you have that publicity machine behind you of, oh, and here's my business? Like, are you doing it in tandem? Because a lot of the times I just see that they become a one night hit and then I have no idea what their actual profession is.
Yeah. And it's
So,
hard. I also don't want to judge people too
yeah.
harshly, because as a culture, I mean, a reality star was a president, right? So it's
Mhm.
really also hard to tell, like, a young person, now focus on your grades and do this unpaid internship. Like, I came up from that school where I did like 3 or 4 unpaid internships before I graduated. Like, I worked at CNN and Bad Boy Records and all of these places before I even stepped foot into the industry. My first job was at William Morris Endeavor, very famous Hollywood talent agency, in their mailroom trainee program. Which, again, it's, if you know Hollywood, it's like there have been books written about this program. I made $400 a week living in New York, and that's before taxes. Like, that's what it was. It's not negotiable. Like, you should be so happy that we're even giving you this opportunity. And that was the mindset, and that was the industry. Because I think back then we really believed in like the institution and wanting to wear that logo and that brand across your back. I think now a lot of times people have more of an entrepreneurial spirit, which I do really respect. But at the end of the day, the work has to be good, because I know a lot of people, again, they got followers, they're all over social posting private jets and beach life and, hashtag no days off. And I'm like, but you don't do anything. Like, what does all of that mean? Like, are you a travel expert? Or do you know about aviation? Like, is that why you keep posting about these private jets? Like, what is it? And if so, I think that you can use your passion and interest in very kind of interesting ways, which I love about social media. But I do think that it can also become very seductive. It's almost like, I think about writing this book, right? It took like 3 years from proposal to when you're going to see it on the bookshelves on October 10th. Although you can pre-order now based upon when this interview goes up. But imagine if instead of writing, I was just posting. All right,
Mhm.
guys, I'm getting my desk set up. This is my coffee. This is how I take my decaf latte. Oh, look, this is me getting my nails done before an interview at some point. But what did you write the book? Because you seem to be doing a lot of, living the life without doing the work. And for any, young person out there, remember, social media is everyone's highlight reel. Like
Mm.
if you go on my page, it's very professional and you're going to see I get to do cool things, talk to great people. It's really fun, but you don't see behind the scenes after that interview with like your favorite rapper. You got to transcribe that interview. Then you got to write the article. Then you might have to go through edits, right? Like it's a
Mhm.
process, and you have to fall in love with the process, whatever you do, in order to be successful. It can't just be you want the flowers, you want the accolades, the fun stuff. It's really about falling in love with the work. And if you do that, I'm a firm believer all those other really fun, nice things come along with it.
Well, and I feel that your book and just hip hop revolutionizing high fashion, that it came at a moment, even I want to know like where did that seedling come from? Because I feel like you bringing up the entrepreneurial spirit, it's conversations I'm having constantly on the podcast, which is wonderful, is the university. There's a crisis in the profession and jobs, and like they're not hiring. And I feel this isn't just the university. This is so many industries. I mean, the print magazine industry. We could look at the New York Times. Like all of these industries, I feel are in a flux
Yeah.
and need to intersect with other fields. So it seems like that really is at the heart of what you're doing with fashion and hip hop is they need one another to be successful. Like, is that where this origin is just what you're observing in your own culture and looking around at the
Yeah.
world?
Yeah. I think it's for me, what's really important, because this is my first book, was it's to write stories that are essential through this aspirational lens, because even in the literary world, hip hop books don't really get acquired, right? And if they do, they're usually like a rapper's memoir, and they all kind of follow the same trajectory if you read a lot of them. And for me, it's this idea that we also need anthologies. Like we need books that hopefully are prescribed in academic settings and are used to create documentaries and TV shows and movies. Like that historical context as well as the analysis is really important. And for me, that is something that I really strive for. And I think, so very early on, we got a lot of great critical reviews for this book, like Kirkus and Booklist, like these very kind of literary places.
Mhm.
But I also love that like New York Mag likes it. And, people that aren't just from the literary world. Like oftentimes, even as outside looking in, that world publishing just felt very kind of ivory tower, and the only people writing books had really fancy degrees. Oftentimes it was very kind of homogenous, like who was telling stories. And I think to your point, it's absolutely important to open up those barriers and to have more of this cross pollination. I think is so important. The timing of my book really couldn't have come better because it really bookends with Pharrell getting his job at Louis Vuitton. So I got to shout out P for that, because I don't think he realized it, but having him take that job really was that nice punctuation point. But also opens it up of like, what's the future? In my mind, I would love to see a hip hop line having that staying power beyond the artist's career span, beyond just sort of this idea of that name was sort of hot and buzzy. In the same way, like I still wear Ralph Lauren, right? I'll wear Tommy Hilfiger, and it doesn't matter what season it is, what's going on in the zeitgeist. Like you can wear polo forever, and in fact people will wear polo forever, because it's just the brand has done such a great job of creating what this means, right? So I would love to see that from a hip hop perspective. I don't know what that looks like, but I think that would be great, because oftentimes when celebrities come into fashion, it still is based upon how hot they are now. So without a hot song, is no one going to want to wear your clothes? Right. And that's tough with any kind of line, whether it be fashion. We see it in the beauty space a lot now. That, remember the celebrity skincare era, everyone and their
Oh yeah.
mom was like lathering olive oil on their face because that was what was in the zeitgeist. But now a lot of those lines we don't talk about anymore, because at the end of the day, the product has to be good, and that's the only way it's going to continue. So I would love to see that from like a hip hop fashion brand, like really almost making it just like this overarching, just an American household name, that it doesn't matter. Maybe the artist hasn't picked up a mic in 50 years. It doesn't matter what the trend is that season, but people still want to wear those clothes.
Yeah, well, you're so right. I remember how many celebrities have created cologne or perfume lines. And
Yeah.
then it's like, I don't know what happened. Because I mean,
Yeah.
I still go to my Ralph Lauren cologne. Like I'm very
Classic.
particular. It's
Yeah.
classic, yes. But like I'm just thinking,
It's hard too, because I also understand from a business perspective, when someone offers you a lot of money to put your name on something,
mhm,
it's hard to say no, right? And I think before it was the idea of artists might be modeling the clothes. Then for a while, every rapper had a fashion line, whether it was Wu Wear, Eminem had a fashion line with Shady, Busta
mm,
Rhymes, Outkast, like everyone had a fashion line, to the point where, I mean, Eminem's a great rapper, but like, did people want to wear his clothing outside of the fan base? Because you'll always have the fan base, they're going to love it. But how does that translate to someone who's not a fan of the music? And that was always a difficulty. I've talked to some artists behind the scenes, and they'll say now, I don't want to do a line. It's too expensive. And I don't want to take on the logistics and manufacturing and finding suppliers. I'd rather just put on, like, Balmain or Balenciaga or whatever, get
mhm,
my check and keep it moving. And I can't fault them for that. But I think you do then see people like Pharrell, like Kanye, who for his many, many ups and downs, I think he really wants his line to live beyond him, right? I think, what we saw with his fallout with Adidas, we don't know the future, because there are some people, like kids I see on the street in New York now, they still wear Yeezys. And it's like,
mm,
yeah, and what? And then others are like, no, like his personal afflictions and his hurtful words, I'll never wear that again. So
mm.
that becomes difficult, right? Like, how, as a well-known, outspoken celeb, can you even have a line? Or is it going to be so ephemeral? Like, if you're ever having a good day, sales go up. If you're having a bad day, sales go down. And you can't run a business that way.
Yeah. Well, as we're nearing the end, I have to just, especially with the fall, in my opinion, that is when Manhattan is at its prime, is
Love it.
October.
Hoodie season.
It is. And one of my favorite trips to do is to just go to Soho and go into all the boutiques, go into even like the Ralph Lauren or the Gucci. Like I think people think they have to, that's like the velvet rope is I think people actually believe they have to buy from those stores. It's like, no, just treat it as a museum. Like that's what I do is I
Yeah.
look around and I just see, oh, this is what the fall fashion to see all these influences from pop culture of hip hop, like even Ralph Lauren. It's just interesting to see how it starts to change. Like they still have their preppy. I was always drawn to their preppy clothing. I mean, even what I'm wearing now is Gap. Like I'm in that vein.
Love
But
it.
yeah, and I mean, but they're also preppy intersects with hip hop. Like it's so interesting to see how it's changing in the fashion houses. So,
Yeah.
you know, are you a fan of going into the boutiques and seeing how the hip hop industry is just still like has impacted these boutiques and what's currently going on is that they're rebranding themselves.
Yeah. I mean, there were some seasons that I just felt every line was just seeing what Kanye did. We're
Mm,
all going to just see what Yeezy's doing and do some rendition of that. Almost every line now has some version of streetwear. It's like, all right, we see what Jerry Lorenzo's doing over at Fear of God, so we're just gonna, pull our version of that. I think though, for every fashion line, they have their seasons, right? So that's what's
mm,
kind of interesting. But again, to kind of the earlier point, to have a sustainable line, people need to know, like when you say Ralph Lauren, you immediately a polo shirt comes to mind, or a
mhm.
rug, or I mean, I love their bear shirts. I mean, bear sweaters. I have like 10 of those. But those are just kind of the eternal classics, and everything else is just icing on the top. So I think for lines, they have to be mindful, like, what do you do well? Right, that other people don't do well. The news just came out that H&M is working with Heron Preston, and same thing. It's like pulling someone from the streetwear hip hop world, hoping he can make H&M kind of cool. It can be really useful for him too, because they have that great notion of flipping around inventory quickly, the distribution channels, like they have all of those things and also a great price point. So hopefully maybe someone who has never heard of him in like the middle of America now might know him as a designer. It can be very, very win-win. I think when it comes to clothing, though, you hit a really good point where I don't want people to ever feel like if they can't afford something that they still can't take that aesthetic and influence and create that high-low look or just a low look. And that's fine too, right? I mean, that's another sort of takeaway is when I think of like stylish people, it's not always just somebody who can buy the biggest brands. It's how you wear it, right? It's, are you wearing the clothes or the clothes wearing you? And I think what's cool now is we are embracing, the Gap and H&M and Zara and all of those places have really, stepped their game up. I mean, I go to Uniqlo and it's packed full of people because, they love their neutrals and things that you can layer. And I love that idea that it doesn't merely have to be spending sort of your whole paycheck.
Hi, did I mention that it's spooky season? This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and guess what? I have so many Halloween and fall designs and crafts in my apartment. And guess what? There is a person who's made me so many Halloween horror fall themed items, and her name is Mandy Bengal. She owns Mandy Made It, a craft crochet company. So Mandy talked to me and said, Andrew, I want everyone out there to know that if they mention ITBR and that they heard my ad, that I will give them a free ITBR t-shirt. So make sure you mention ITBR and order from Mandy crocheted pumpkins that she actually is using cinnamon sticks as the stem, which is a brilliant idea. How cozy. And also filling the pumpkins with potpourri. I already want to wrap myself in a blanket. She has Halloween keychains, other Halloween crochet designs. So how can you reach out to her? Go to her Facebook or Instagram at Mandy Made It. Reach out to her. She will ship items out to you. If you live in the South New Jersey, Philly area, she'll arrange to have you either pick it up or deliver it to you. So Mandy just makes such beautiful crocheted items. And I'm so happy that she supports the podcast. I've known Mandy since I was a child. We were in theater camp together. That's how I met Mary. So the three of us have known each other a long time. Okay, head over to Mandy Made It for your handmade crocheted items for this Halloween and fall. Hi, everyone. This is Andrew, and I am interrupting what I know is such an exciting Ivory Tower Boiler Room episode to tell you all about one of my favorite podcasts. It's called That Old Gay Classic Cinema, and it's hosted by Christian Garcia. Christian is joined with guest co hosts to talk about classic cinema films that we know and love, and he analyzes them through a queer lens. So he's talked about The Sound of Music, Alfred Hitchcock, The Wizard of Oz, Sleeping Beauty, 101 Dalmatians, and recently Hello, Dolly. I actually was on his first ever episode to talk about my love of The Sound of Music and playing Captain Von Trapp in my high school musical. Then I was joined with Mary DePippi, the host of True Crime and Academia, and our friend Travis Roundtree to talk about Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. Mary just had Christian on True Crime and Academia to talk about female poisoners, including the evil queen from Snow White and actual real life female poisoners. So, Christian's podcast is the best. You must add it to your listen list. After you listen to this episode, make sure you head over to That Old Gay Classic Cinema on Apple and Spotify. Make sure you follow him on Instagram at That Old Gay Classic Cinema. And he's also on TikTok. Don't forget TikTok. Okay, I can't wait for you all to listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema. And now back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room.
But it's also this idea that the industry is looking at hip hop and looking at streetwear and realizing that's what people want. So if we're going to do it, bringing people from that world in, like that, I think that's what's important in the fashion industry, having more young people, people of color, not just in design and sort of celebrity roles, but behind the scenes in the C-suite, like that, those things matter for an industry to change, right? Otherwise, I think it's merely kind of window dressing. So I think if the fashion industry truly wants to be global and inclusive and also make money, I mean, hip hop is the #1 genre in America. So it's a multi-billion-dollar business. So if you want to make a meaningful connection with those fans, I think one has to think beyond just kind of these headlines and the kind of one-off collaborations, but make a true ongoing and long-term investment.
Well, so this is my last question. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I can't wait for everyone to have Fashion Killa in their hands or, you know, in their earbuds pulsating as your audiobook. I
Oh yeah, and
have
the
to
audiobook, I'm not doing the reading, so you don't got to hear my Midwestern voice, but the audio reader, because I was able to select who it is, her voice is so smooth and sexy. I'm like, it'll be perfect if you just need to like relax and vibe and go to sleep.
yeah,
But
draw up a bubble bath.
yeah, serious.
Listen.
Just listen, have that moment. And then also the cover. I mean, for people who can't
Oh
see it,
yeah.
I was really intentional, even with picking like the artwork, like what color palette. Like I wanted to make sure this book feels luxe and it feels expensive. It's not expensive. It's under $30, but it's a luxury product. And I wanted someone to be able, when they have this book, to put it on their coffee table, put it on their nightstand, take a selfie with it, and it feels really kind of special and important as well. So yeah, so I think I kind of just coming from that holistic perspective.
Yeah, and for everyone, they can't see, but I actually have my skull ring on. So
Ooh,
it's a nice pairing. It's like a wine and cheese pairing here, the book
nice.
and the ring. So my last question is just now that your book is out there, now that you've interviewed and you continue to interview, I'm sure, but those from the hip hop and fashion industry, what is something when you were doing the interviews when people found out, oh, Sowmya's putting this work out, like is putting together this chronology of fashion meets hip hop, the 50-year anniversary. That just you really took it to heart and it meant so much. Someone's response, it could be a personal response or just a general response to your work.
I was very lucky in that people were really excited, and so many people behind the scenes are like, this story has to be told, and we're really so thankful it's being told with integrity, with intelligence, with care. I think especially for some of the people who aren't the household names, you know, nobody interviews them. And many of them felt like my legacy was be forgotten because I was a writer at some magazine or I was the editor of a now defunct publication. I was behind the scenes. I was an intern to a famous person. And just this idea that these stories can be told in such a sort of a permanent way in this sort of like forever time capsule. I think they were truly grateful. And that, of course, was really touching to know that you have any part in that. Yeah. And I think it's for people who are in this industry and have been sort of blessed to be in this game as long as I have. For me, giving back and having that positive contribution is really important, right? It's not just sort of like the fame and the flash and look at all the famous people I know. Like, no, it's really what are you doing to invest in the culture, inspire that next generation? Like, I hope after this, more people write books about this. Like, I want this to be the stepping stone, right? Not that I own this space. No, like I want more university courses and documentaries and all of these things. It just open up open up opportunities and just kind of level up the playing field for everybody. So I'm just really appreciative. I really hope everybody who buys Fashion Killa, how hip hop revolutionized high fashion, which comes out on 10/10,
Yep.
they love it. Share it, post it, make sure you tag me because I want to just, make sure shout out everyone who's supporting it. I think it's going to be, whether you're a hip hop fan, a fashion fan, or just really a pop culture generalist. Like, I have friends who are in neither world. They would have to look up certain names, or this was an opportunity for them to go through Google Image and say, "Oh, I know that person." And you'll learn something from whatever world you come from. And what's great is every chapter does stand on its own. So if you're just like, look, I just want to know about streetwear, there is a chapter. Or if you really want to kind of dissect sort of sexuality and gender, there's a chapter about that. So I think there's really something for everybody, that you'll be entertained. You're definitely going to learn something. I mean, I learned a lot even writing the book. Like, I thought I was the expert, but I learned a lot. And I think you're also just going to be kind of delighted. There's over 40 pictures, everyone from Little Kim at her first Met Gala, Cardi B and Schiaparelli, Jay-Z in like all denim Rockaware, like the Canadian tuxedo, so to speak. Puffy showing off one of his Sean John windows at Bloomingdale's. I mean, there's just so many of these fun moments that I think, no matter if you're just a celebrity fan or a pop culture fan, you're going to get something out of it for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Sowmya Krishnamurthy, who I really can't wait for everyone to get their hands on Fashion Killa. I have the links in the show notes for the podcast. Can't wait to have you back on again. Not rushing you for your next book, but I'm sure if I need like a pop culture expert on the show, I know who to call when it comes to the music and the fashion industry. So this has been wonderful, and congratulations on your work. It's truly an incredible history that you have written.
Thank you. Fashion Killa 10/10.
Yes. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye, Sowmya. Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby. I want to thank you so much for listening to the ITBR and TCIA episodes. Make sure, if you don't, follow, rate, and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Also, make sure you follow ITBR on TikTok and Instagram at Ivory Tower Boiler Room, and TCIA on TikTok and Instagram at True Crime and Academia. Also, we have a brand new Patreon membership system. So I just want to explain it to you all quickly. So if you want to become an ITBR student, it is $5 a month. You get ad-free ITBR and TCIA episodes and video interviews. If you want to become an ITBR professor for $10 a month, you get all of those ad-free benefits, but you also get access to both the ITBR and TCIA book clubs. You can join both book clubs, get ad-free episodes, plus you're going to get all of our extra video episodes. So I am rewatching Queer as Folk. Christian Garcia from That Old Gay Classic Cinema is joining us, and he's rewatching Smash. Mary is going to start to rewatch shows as well. You even get access to what I'm calling the ITBR Teaches. So if I'm recapping a movie or a TV show, including Barbie, Halloween movies, and horror films, you get access to that as well. And then I also am offering consultation services. So for $30, you get your first initial consultation with me. It's a 1 hour private Zoom. I will help create your podcast, your media brand. How do you navigate academia as an undergrad or a grad student? Do you need help with technology? It could be teaching tools, Spotify for podcasters, video editor software. Do you want to expand your social media presence as an artist, writer, podcaster, or academic? Do you want help on how to create a public humanities identity like I've created for myself? So I'm offering that consultation service. You can find more info about it on Patreon. And you also can join our book clubs. If you want to just join the ITBR book club or the TCIA book club, you can do that for $4 a month. Patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. That is Patreon.com/ Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Thanks to the team, Mary DePippi, our chief contributor, and thank you to our 2 new interns from Stony Brook University, Jonathan and Sarah. Bye, everyone. Until next time.